Ni Chong's smile was lovelier than the most fragrant of roses. It was the first time Hiwei realized that not all humans were terrifying. It was this girl who saved Hiwei from the abyss of endless darkness. Yet Ni Chong, too, walked into her own inferno. If she hadn't twisted her back 2 days ago, Zhao Xuemei would never have spent money to hire someone to clean her apartment. The young girl sent by the housekeeping center was so frail that her ankles were thinner than Zhao Xuemei's wrists. She looked like a gust of wind could knock her over. How could someone like that possibly clean anything properly? Haven't you eaten? Can't you see the thick grime in the cracks of those tiles? Scrub harder. Did no one teach you that you also need to clean the drain pipes? If you can't reach, use your hands and dig it out. Why else do you think I paid you to come here? And the floors. You need to wipe them with a cloth. These are solid wood floors. If you scratch them with that mop, can you afford to pay for the damages? The old cassette player in the corner played Zhao Xuemei's favorite Huangmei opera. The melodic folk tunes, usually so pleasing, now grated on her ears and only deepened her irritation. Zhao Xuemei couldn't understand how cleaning companies could charge such outrageous prices these days without anyone stepping in to regulate them. 60 yuan to clean a measly 50 square meter apartment. Why not just rob her outright? She blamed everything on that person at the market 2 days ago, whoever it was, who had bumped into her. Since then, the pain had been so intense that even sleep was a struggle. Housework? Forget it. Even lifting her leg felt like it would snap her spine in half. If that culprit hadn't vanished so quickly, she would have made them pay dearly for medical expenses. The company doesn't train you people at all, does it? That window glass, look at it. Even from here, I can see streaks of water. Are you cutting corners because you think an old lady like me is easy to bully? Wait until my son comes home. He'll deal with you. This apartment, less than 50 square meters in size but over 50 years old, held everything Zhao Xuemei had earned over a lifetime of hard work. She sat protectively in the middle of the room, alert and defensive like a goose guarding its territory. I'm telling you now, I'm not paying a single cent for service like this. I'll complain to the platform and demand a refund. Zhao Xuemei had already planned her arguments. She'd say the cleaners' work was sloppy, their attitude poor, and if push came to shove, she'd threaten to call the Consumer Protection Agency. She would get her money back one way or another. The young cleaner, who had been silently enduring Zhao Xuemei's shouting, seemed unfazed. She neither defended herself nor showed any response. She simply lowered her head and continued scrubbing. The woman wore the company's standard orange baseball cap over a disposable dust cap, a mask covering her face, rubber gloves on her hands, and shoe covers on her feet. She was wrapped from head to toe, leaving only a small section of delicate, pale skin visible at the neck. You're young. Why waste your life as a cleaner? Worthless. Your parents must be ashamed of you. Zhao Xuemei snapped, growing even angrier at the girl's unyielding silence. Finally, the cleaner stopped what she was doing. What are you looking at? Did I say something wrong? Seeing that her words had gotten a rise, Zhao Xuemei felt triumphant. How much can you even earn cleaning houses? Especially for a girl like you, staying alone in strangers' homes all day. Who knows if you're doing something indecent on the side? Zhao Xuemei grew more impassioned as she spoke, but before she realized it, the young cleaner was standing directly in front of her, looking down at her from above. Startled, Zhao Xuemei flinched but refused to back down.
What?
What's that look for? Do you want to hit me? You think you can lay a hand on me because I'm an old woman here alone? My son will be home any minute now. I'd like to see how tough you'll be then. Before she could finish, the sound of keys turning in the lock echoed from the door. Zhao Xuemei, seated on the sofa, looked up triumphantly at the insolent young cleaner, her face breaking into a smug smile. At the convenience store, the store clerk was restocking the shelves with drinks. She looked to be in her early 20s, her youthful face brimming with energy unique to the young. Even in today's era of dressing freely, her outfit was particularly eye-catching. A cropped, form-fitting top traced her graceful figure, with a sliver of pale skin at her waist peeking through as she moved. The man shuffled around the freezer section, fingers lazily sifting through the brightly colored ice creams, though his gaze lingered unabashedly on the clerk's curves. Every time she bent down, he could see through her neckline, catching glimpses of her pale chest. The soft mounds, partially hidden in shadow, seemed to tease him like timid rabbits. A heat began to coil in the pit of his stomach. Only when the clerk glared at him for the fourth time did he reluctantly grab a random popsicle from the freezer. "Hand me that pack of Hongdashin," he said as he approached the counter. Then, pretending to scrutinize the cigarettes, he continued, "This brand is no good. Cheap stuff, makes me cough. And Yushi isn't much better. The filter is terrible." The man kept ordering the clerk to take down boxes and put them back, using the opportunity to brush his hand against hers as she passed them to him. He couldn't remember the last time he had touched skin so soft, so smooth. It felt like polished jade, delicate beyond belief. Lost in his fantasies, the man failed to notice the clerk's growing annoyance until, at last, she slammed the box of cigarettes down on the counter. "Are you buying or not? If you can't even afford a pack of cigarettes, stop loitering here like a creep. You're shameless." The clerk's sharp words pierced the man's fragile pride, making his face burn hot with embarrassment. His fists clenched, then relaxed again, countless curses bubbling up in his throat, but all he managed to squeeze out was a single profanity. "You stuck-up bitch. Just wait until you're crying on my bed. You'll regret this." His injured wrist throbbed faintly as he stormed out, seething. In his mind, he replayed scenes of the young clerk, now naked and helpless beneath him, begging him through her tears. The fire in his belly burned hotter. Down the corridor, his mother's nagging voice still droned on and on. His mother had mentioned earlier that she'd hired a cleaner for the day. He had gone out of his way to avoid the hassle, yet somehow it still wasn't finished. That old woman was getting more useless by the day, he thought bitterly. Now, she couldn't even clean the house without spending money on help. He himself couldn't afford to see a doctor after being beaten, yet she had no qualms about wasting money on something as trivial as cleaning the floor. The thought only made his mood worse. She dreamed of torrents of rain crashing down like stones, hitting the ground with a heavy, suffocating thud. She lay there, soaked on the clammy bed as the cold, damp sheets clung to her exposed skin. Then, with every breath, they transformed into dark green leeches, inch by inch devouring her body. Through the curtain of rain, a pitch-black water buffalo slowly approached. It finally settled on top of her, pinning her chest and limbs. Its foul breath, thick with a metallic stench, blew hot against her face, and its massive, crushing weight left her unable to breathe. The endless darkness buried her whole. Hiwei woke up drenched in sweat, wrapped in bone-deep fatigue. Perhaps it was the sudden wave of stifling, humid heat that had struck the city this week, or perhaps it was the lingering horror of that despair-filled nightmare that left her so unsettled. The air reeked of something foul. Maybe it was her imagination, but no matter how tightly she stuffed cloth into the gaps of her door, the stench from the next apartment kept seeping in. By noon, the smell had become unbearable. Dragging her heavy body out of bed, Hiwei opened every window in the room. She mopped the floor twice, sprayed deodorizer 3 times, brushed her teeth 3 times, washed her hands 5 times, and took 2 showers. Only when her skin felt dry and tight did she finally sit down at the dining table. Before she could settle, a woman's hysterical scream erupted from next door. Startled, Hiwei jumped, the chopstick slipping from her hand and clattering noisily onto the floor. That all-too-familiar sense of losing control came rushing back. Desperately trying to calm herself, Hiwei took deep breaths, then cleaned the floor again, twice, and washed her hands 8 times. Finally, at 3:30 p.m., she managed to take her first bite of lunch. Soft, smoky bits of roasted green pepper wrapped around the dry, cold rice, grounding the unease swirling in her heart. She had been eating this same chili rice sauce for 12 days straight. It was a brand a friend had once recommended, salty, fragrant, and spicy. Just a small spoonful was enough to down an entire bowl of rice. Thinking back, she, someone who had grown up in a coastal region, hadn't always been so addicted to spicy food. It was all thanks to her college days. And now, the person who had introduced her to blisteringly spicy hot pot was gone, leaving only Hwee behind, clinging to that habit. Every time she cried from the heat, nose running and eyes watering, it was a bittersweet memory of the days they once shared. Their meeting hadn't been anything extraordinary. It was at the student orientation, where the older girl, seeing Hwee stand out as awkwardly out of place in the lively crowd, handed her a glass of juice with a kind smile. After that, they ran into each other a few more times, purely by chance. From then on, Hwee was placed into the older girl's mental category of familiar faces. What followed was an ever-increasing number of texts, invitations to eat, and casual outings. It was the kind of carefree friendship Hwee had never dared to dream of. To her, it felt like an unexpected gift from the heavens, one that both surprised and delighted her. The girl's warm, open-hearted gestures slowly swept into Hwee's life like a soft, comforting breeze, clearing away the storm clouds. Her unconditional acceptance and fearless protection felt like a warm spring, endlessly nourishing Hwee's barren and withered soul. A tiny flower called friendship had broken through the desolate soil and bloomed in a quiet corner of her heart. To this day, Hwee could vividly recall every detail about that girl. Those memories became her medicine, something she would relive over and over again on days when the pain made it hard to breathe. For instance, how the girl's favorite hot pot place was 600 meters left of the school gate, then a winding series of turns deep into an alley. She loved the fried skewers there and would always order crispy rice cakes and lotus root. Or how the girl had a passion for gardening. She once spent months nurturing an impressive succulent arrangement for her boyfriend's birthday. In the end, she had to rope Hwee into helping her carry the 30-kilogram plant pot up 5 flights of stairs. Or how the girl used to say they were fated to meet simply because their names formed a word. "Look," she'd said, smiling brilliantly. "I'm Chong and you're Wei. Put together, we're Rose Chiang Wei." The smile on her face that day was more beautiful than the most exquisite bouquet. It was the first time Hwee had realized that not all humans were terrifying. It was that girl who had pulled Hwee out of her abyss, out of her hellish nightmare. Hwee had no regrets. The forensics room. The usually quiet forensics room now looked like a cannibal's winter stockpile. Neatly cut chunks of flesh and bone were laid across the table, disturbingly resembling the premium pork legs you'd find in a supermarket freezer. But the moment you remembered those pieces once belonged to a human being, even the most seasoned detectives couldn't help but feel a chill crawl down their spines. Over 50 palm-sized fragments of a body had been scattered across the city's dumpsters. Fingerprints had been completely burned away, significantly complicating the task of identifying the remains. According to the coroner, the victim was an adult male, aged between 30 and 40, with an average build. The pale color of the body's skin, mucous membranes, and fingernail beds suggested the cause of death: exsanguination. The coroner also discovered evidence of fractures on the victim's right wrist and left rib cage. Based on the healing process, the injuries had occurred about a month prior. Cross-referencing the city's medical records for broken bones within the past 3 months, the police narrowed it down to 6 potential patients. Among them, one name immediately caught their attention: Wang Peng. Wang Peng had a long and disgraceful history. From his teenage years, he had been a frequent visitor to police stations. His rap sheet included dozens of offenses, with sexual harassment and theft being the most common. 3 years ago, he had even been convicted of rape and sentenced to prison. He had only been released just over a month ago. Wang Peng's hospital visit for a fracture occurred on the 3rd day after his release. It seemed someone had been waiting for him, meticulously timing their act of revenge to begin the moment Wang Peng walked free. 3 years earlier, at age 33, Wang Peng had raped a female college student. The young woman reported the incident to the police, and Wang Peng was swiftly arrested and sentenced. But the story didn't end there. After Wang Peng's sentencing, his mother, Zhao Xuemei, caused multiple scenes at the police station, insisting that the girl had seduced Wang Peng and that her son had been framed. She even protested outside the victim's university with banners to defend her son. A month later, unable to bear the harassment and rumors, the young woman ended her own life. Wang Peng and Zhao Xuemei's home was located in an urban village, one of the city's most densely populated areas, where narrow streets were lined with shoulder-to-shoulder, hastily built apartment blocks. Just as the police had anticipated, Wang Peng's home was empty. Neighbors described the family as infamous troublemakers in the area. People avoided getting involved with them at all costs. The son, Wang Peng, was a recently released rapist who spent his days wandering aimlessly, while the mother, Zhao Xuemei, was just as notorious. She was known for being ruthless, frequently causing disputes over petty gains. Whether with the police, local vendors, or shopkeepers, everyone had suffered at her hands. Because of their poor relationships with the neighbors, no one paid much attention to the family's movements. All they could say was that Zhao Xuemei and Wang Peng often argued loudly, blasting music at deafening volumes at random hours. Beyond that, there were few useful clues. Inside Wang Peng's apartment, despite its small size and clutter, everything was surprisingly tidy. Daily necessities had been neatly organized, the furniture was properly arranged, and the room was spotless, like someone had methodically prepared for a long journey. In the golden glow of the afternoon sun streaming through the windows, the house looked almost ordinary, like any other modest home where two people had lived simple but well-maintained lives. Except for the bathroom. When the curtains were drawn, the walls and floor lit up with glaring streaks of blue luminescence, evidence of a bloody crime that had been cleaned but not erased. Zhao Xuemei's payment records revealed that she had booked a housekeeping service through a group buying platform. The cleaner had been scheduled to arrive 10 days ago, the same day as Wang Peng's final purchase. Combined with a disturbingly clean crime scene, the police deduced that the murderer likely used the housekeeping service as a cover to gain entry into Wang Peng's home and carry out the killing. "The order wasn't mine, I outsourced it," explained the cleaning company employee who had originally accepted the job. Someone in the group chat offered to take care of the urban village orders for cheap, since she lived nearby. As the employee described, most cleaning staff were part of a private group chat where they could exchange jobs they didn't want to do, either because they were too far or inconvenient. Those willing to take the jobs could do so at a lower rate. All that was needed was the uniform of the original company, and the first cleaner could pocket a portion of the fee without lifting a finger. The person who accepted Wang Peng's order had joined the group chat half a month earlier and left 10 days ago, the day of the murder. She had barely spoken in the chat and had only taken on that single job. Medical records also revealed that Zhao Xuemei had purchased medicine for bruises and sprains 2 weeks ago, suggesting she had been injured around the same time the mysterious account joined the cleaning group chat. 1 week later, Zhao Xuemei scheduled the housekeeping service, and the same account took the job. The evidence was damning. From Zhao Xuemei's injury to her booking the service, everything appeared to be part of a carefully orchestrated plan. Zhao Xuemei woke up from her stupor, surrounded by a silence as heavy as a grave. She had lost track of how many days she had been imprisoned here. In this lightless room, time had lost all meaning. The tiny space was barren except for a projector hanging from the ceiling. The door was locked, with a small, dog-sized flap near the bottom, just large enough for food or a bedpan to be pushed through. The last time she had eaten felt like it belonged to another century. The hunger burning in her stomach had turned into a fiery, roiling ache, torturing her every second. Her deteriorating condition made it nearly impossible to think. Pain and dizziness crushed her each time she tried to remember how she ended up here. Maybe it was just a nightmare. Zhao Xuemei collapsed weakly onto the ground, praying she would wake up soon. Suddenly, the projector overhead whirred to life, casting a sharp beam of light onto the bare wall. The room remained silent. There was no sound system, only the harsh visuals. At first, the blurry, distorted images were incomprehensible to Zhao Xuemei, just flashes of red and white, like someone mashing meat or perhaps smashing a watermelon. She rubbed her eyes furiously and looked again. This time, she saw it clearly. It was a video of a man being dismembered. The camera shook, but she could still make out the pale limbs and the spinning electric saw. The man's brain was numbed by powerful anesthetics, leaving him oblivious to the horror unfolding. Only his basic reflexes caused his muscles to twitch futilely. Blood and flesh sprayed in every direction with each drop of the saw, painting the all-too-familiar walls of the room captured in the video. Nausea surged through Zhao Xuemei, and a voice in her head screamed at her to stop watching. But before she could look away, the camera panned to the man's face. It was a face she knew all too well. She could still recall every expression it had worn, its rebellious teenage sneer, its spoiled childhood pout, and even its squalling, wrinkled look at birth. A stabbing pain exploded in her temples. The realization struck like a lightning bolt. She understood where she was and what was happening. Rage surged through Zhao Xuemei's frail, malnourished body like an injection of adrenaline, jerking her back to life. She had only one thought. Why? They weren't saints, but they weren't evil either. In a world where everyone fought for survival, they were just trying to live their lives. What was so wrong about that? Yes, she liked to take advantage of situations, but only to make life better for her and her son. And Wang Peng, he may have been trouble-prone, but that was because bad influences had led him astray. In a chaotic world like this, who hadn't made mistakes? Besides, he had already served his time. He'd been educated in prison, and the law had forgiven him. What more did they want? They had fought hard to carve out their little corner of the world. What gave anyone the right to punish them like this? The more Zhao Xuemei thought about it, the more the fury festered inside her. She began to curse, vicious, venomous words spilling from her mouth as she raked through generations of insults, cursing the person who had killed her precious son and thrown her into this hellhole. Her voice echoed in the sealed space like stones dropping into a dead pond, unanswered. The only reply was the burning dryness of her mouth and the raw pain in her throat. By the time her voice had grown hoarse and she could no longer produce a sound, a creaking noise came from the door. The dog flap opened slowly. A swell of triumph rose in Zhao Xuemei's chest. She had broken her captor's resolve. No one, not even a murderer, could withstand the wrath of her words. She crawled desperately to the door, unbothered by the filth on the floor, and stretched her hand through the opening, trying to grab hold of the person outside. Fate seemed to smile on her. Blindly reaching, she managed to clutch someone's ankle. Zhao Xuemei's spirit soared. Finally caught you, you bastard. You dared to kill my son and drag me to this godforsaken place. Wait until I get out of here. You'll regret it. Killing him wasn't enough, was it? You had to record it too. What's the matter? Do you watch that filth to enjoy your meals or fuel your dreams? You're a sick, twisted freak. She gripped the ankle with all her strength, hurling insults at the top of her lungs. If she could, she would have shattered that bone with her bare hands and ended their audacity forever. But the person on the other side remained eerily still. Zhao Xuemei's weakened body soon betrayed her. The hunger gnawed at her strength until her hands fell limp, dropping back to the ground. Finally, the person spoke. Yes, why record it indeed? The voice was unexpectedly soft, like a whisper or a murmur to oneself. How can you even ask that? Isn't it obvious what recordings are for? For savoring, for enjoyment, for blackmail. Isn't that what Wang Peng loved to do most? Surely you knew your precious son's tastes well enough. You're right, you know. Only twisted monsters record things like that. You and Wang Peng, both of you. Before Zhao Xuemei could process the words, something was thrown at her. The projector had long since shut off, leaving her to rely on the dim light filtering through the flap to see what was in her hands. It was a spherical object, half clammy with matted hair, half cold and leathery. A mother's intuition pierced through her with terrifying clarity. She knew, even without looking, what it was. But she forced herself to confirm it, trembling as her fingers brushed across the uneven surface, finally landing on a jagged scar. It was the same scar Wang Peng had gotten as a child when he'd cracked his head on the edge of a table and needed 16 stitches. Zhao Xuemei let out a wail of despair. It was a sound she didn't know she could produce, hoarse, shrill, and utterly broken, as if she were vomiting out her very soul. Once the remains were confirmed to be Wang Peng, the rape case from 3 years ago became the most probable motive for the crime. At the time, the case had been straightforward. The perpetrator was caught red-handed and confessed to the crime. As a result, the police didn't investigate the circumstances in greater detail. There was no official record of the events leading to the victim Ni Chong's suicide. What was known, however, was that her death left a trail of devastation. Ni Chong's mother fell into severe schizophrenia and was committed to a psychiatric facility, while her father succumbed to a stroke shortly after, his grief and worry having consumed him. A once happy and loving family had been shattered beyond repair. In search of more information, the police contacted Chen Yichen, the victim's boyfriend at the time. 3 years had passed, and the young man, who had once been brimming with anger and indignation, now carried a subdued calmness. Regarding Wang Peng's death, he said simply, deserved. Chen Yichen had been with Ni Chong for 4 years. From their freshman orientation to their thesis defense, they had walked hand in hand through every season of those years, ready to marry as soon as they graduated. But just before their graduation, tragedy dragged them into an unfathomable abyss. To this day, Chen Yichen could vividly recall how powerless he had felt when he saw his girlfriend curled up in a corner, trembling uncontrollably. Panic, heartbreak, anger, guilt, emotions too overwhelming to name had gripped his throat, leaving him breathless. All he could do was hold her tightly and choke out the words, "It's okay. It's all over now." Back then, he had no idea how absurdly meaningless his attempt at comfort would prove to be. After the incident, a crushing sense of insecurity consumed Ni Chong. She became timid, hypersensitive, and quick-tempered, unable to focus on her studies or even hold a normal conversation with her classmates. Eventually, she took leave from school and moved back home to recover. But even at home, the onslaught of rumors wouldn't leave her alone. People, like bloodthirsty hyenas catching the scent of fresh wounds, swarmed around her pain, eagerly turning her suffering into fodder for their dull lives. Campus forums erupted with discussions about the assault. While the majority condemned Wang Peng's actions, and some called for protecting the victim's privacy to avoid further harm, there were always those who insisted on blaming the victim. She went with the rapist willingly. It's just mutual consent gone wrong. I don't know why everyone's acting so self-righteous. They already knew each other. Who's to say she didn't call the cops after falling out? Instead of holding the criminal accountable, these people prefer to spew phrases like "flies don't land on a clean egg" and "it takes two to tango," as if these baseless accusations showcase their moral superiority. What truly escalated the situation, however, was the arrival of Zhao Xuemei. Nothing stirred public sentiment more than an elderly woman crying outside the school gates with a massive banner. With streaks of gray in her hair and a 1-meter-long white cloth daubed in red paint reading, "My son is innocent," Zhao Xuemei wailed theatrically, claiming that her honest and simple son had been tricked and led astray by a scheming female student. She painted their family, a widowed mother and her son, as victims torn apart by a cunning seductress. The spectacle spread like wildfire. Photos and short videos of Zhao Xuemei sobbing outside the school gates went viral on Weibo and social media, shared and commented on by thousands. To the masses, it was just another piece of free entertainment, a scandal to scroll past, laugh at, or moralize over. But how many of them understood that every tear Zhao Xuemei shed was deliberate, every step she took carefully planned to distort the truth and heap blame onto the victim? Even though Ni Chong had stopped going to school, she couldn't escape the suffocating web of public opinion as long as her phone connected her to the outside world. Within days, she visibly wasted away. Chen Yichen practically begged her to stop reading the posts. But she couldn't help it. Trapped at home, she had nothing else to do but carefully peek at the outside world through her phone. So Chen Yichen could only watch helplessly as the once bright and confident girl he loved crumbled before his eyes. She wept in front of him, over and over, trying desperately to defend herself. I didn't want this. But who heard her? Who truly cared about the messy, unremarkable truth behind the spectacle? Zhao Xuemei's lies became razor-sharp blades, cutting into Ni Chang's flesh, word by word. The gawking stares and morbid curiosity of strangers manifested into rotten eggs and spoiled vegetables thrown at a prisoner in the streets, festering her wounds until they decayed. Finally, Ni Chang chose to end her life by slitting her wrist arteries in the bathroom. The arteries lie 6 to 7 millimeters beneath the skin. Only by tearing through the flesh and cutting the muscle can they be reached. The pain is unimaginable. Chen Yichen couldn't fathom the level of despair she must have felt to end her life in such a brutal way. But even her death did not bring her the justice she deserved. If she wasn't guilty, why would she kill herself? To Zhao Xuemei, Ni Chang's death became a trophy, proof of her distorted claims. She paraded it proudly, using it to justify her lies and vilify the girl who had died. Compared to Zhao Xuemei's shameless, motherly love, what was a human life worth? I had a motive, but I didn't have the opportunity to commit the crime. I've been out of town for work and only returned 2 days ago. Pulled back to the present, Chen Yichen spoke in a restrained tone. Flight and hotel records confirmed his alibi. Chen Yichen had indeed been out of town during the time of the murder. As for the specifics of how Wang Peng had lured Ni Chang, Chen Yichen didn't know. What he did know was that Wang Peng's harassment had initially targeted one of Ni Chang's closest friends, a younger female classmate. The girl had been Wang Peng's victim first, forced to record compromising videos. Unlike Ni Chang, however, the younger girl chose to stay silent and endure the ordeal, hoping to avoid further trouble. When Ni Chang learned of it, she repeatedly confronted Wang Peng on her friend's behalf.
I told her not to get involved.
That kind of person, she couldn't deal with him. But she never listened. Chen Yichen's voice cracked as he spoke.
She was always like that.
Always throwing herself into the fire for others, never stopping to think about herself, her safety, or the people who loved her. What were we supposed to do without her? According to Chen Yichen, the friend involved was He Wei, who worked at a chain pet hospital. Upon reviewing He Wei's background, it was found that she was born in a rural area. Her father had died young due to alcoholism when she was a child, and her mother, a hardworking woman, raised her alone on a few acres of farmland. Her mother passed away from overwork shortly before He Wei's college entrance exams. Using her scholarship and high exam scores, He Wei came to the city, following the routine path of studying and working, just like every other outsider struggling to survive in the city. However, this seemingly ordinary woman had, a month ago, suddenly submitted her resignation and vanished without a trace. She had no close relatives or friends, and the company was unable to contact her. Her phone had been disconnected, and the only remaining contact was an address on her employment resume, an address suspiciously close to Wang Peng's home. He Wei's rented apartment was far smaller and more dilapidated than Wang Peng's, a mere 20 square meters. The cramped space contained a squat toilet, a shower, a stove, and a mattress, all squeezed together. Despite this, her personal belongings barely filled the small space. A woman in her prime, earning a modest wage, but still able to live independently, yet her life was Spartan, almost prisoner-like in its simplicity. The only advantage over a prison cell was a small south-facing window. The window faced Wang Peng's living room window directly, allowing He Wei to clearly observe his every move. It was hard to imagine what drove He Wei to return to this barely habitable room after long workdays, to spy on Wang Peng's family day after day. Colleagues described He Wei as introverted, someone who kept to herself and had little rapport with others. She was gentle and meticulous with animals, but when dealing with their owners, She often lacked confidence, which led to frustration among clients. Despite this, her professionalism had allowed her to find a steady footing in the hospital. No one knew why Hiwei resigned. The common assumption was that it had something to do with her family. "I saw her on the street once, pushing her grandmother and waiting for a bus," said a young nurse. "I didn't expect Dr. He to be so filial. I couldn't have given up my job to take care of an elderly relative." The girls continued chatting, but the investigating officers grew more suspicious. "How do you know the woman she was pushing was her grandmother?" "She said so herself," the girl replied. "She told us her grandmother had developed Alzheimer's a few years ago. One night, the old woman woke up, crying and insisting on going back to their old home. Doctor, he couldn't refuse her, so she had to take her out in the middle of the night." The reasoning seemed flawless, filled with warmth and detail that made it easy to believe. "When did you see them?" The girl gave the date, which coincided with the day Zhao Xuemei had scheduled the housekeeping service. "Did you see the old woman's face clearly?" "I remember it was around 11 at night. The light was dim, so I couldn't see her face clearly. I only remember the old lady was wearing a mask and had her head lowered, as if she was asleep." With this information, the police quickly retrieved the road surveillance footage from the specified time and location, identifying the taxi Hiwei had boarded. They also obtained the destination details from the ride-sharing platform. The destination was a secluded courtyard on the outskirts of the city. The courtyard was surrounded by a shabby brick wall about the height of a person, looking neglected and uninhabited. Upon closer inspection, the courtyard appeared to be cleaned, with a large succulent arrangement carefully tended in the corner. Inside the yard were two small rooms. One was unlocked, furnished simply with just the bare essentials, but compared to the cramped rental in the urban village, it was far more comfortable. Everything was neatly arranged and spotless. The other room, however, was locked. The door and all the gaps were sealed with cloth, leaving only a small 20 centimeters dog flap at the bottom. Beside it was a stainless steel food bowl, which had been emptied but had oil stains at the bottom, dried and slick with time. Breaking open the door, the foul stench of urine and sweat hit them immediately. But what lay inside was far worse than the smell. The less than 10 square meter room felt like a sealed tomb, cold and oppressive. The dampness and lack of ventilation had led to thick layers of mold growing on the walls and floors, which were covered in slimy brown stains resembling the trail of some sort of grotesque creature. In the corner, there was a rusted toilet, surrounded by fresh excrement. Among the filth, lying motionless with blood covering her face, was Zhao Xuemei, already dead. Beside her was a decayed tongue and, to the police's shock, Wang Peng's severed head. Following the projection from the ceiling, the police found a tablet connected to the projector, containing a chilling murder video. And Hiwei, the instigator of it all, was nowhere to be found. In an abandoned shop deep in an alley, Qin Yichen sat silently across from Hiwei. 3 years hadn't left much trace on Hiwei. She still looked the same, pale, thin, with a shrinking demeanor that made her seem as if she were dragging herself through water with every movement. "This used to be a hot pot restaurant," Chen Yichen said. "It changed hands a few times before I bought it." Chen Yichen was somewhat surprised. Hiwei was just an ordinary salary worker, yet she had emptied her savings to buy a shop. This place used to have 2 refrigerated display cabinets. And Chong loved ordering 2 skewers of crispy rice cakes, 2 skewers of fried lotus root, and just a bottle of iced coconut milk. The seat we're sitting in was Ni Chong's favorite because from here, she could clearly see the orange cat that the barbershop across the street kept. Hiwei spoke softly about those past days, her lowered gaze warm in a way rarely seen. Perhaps everything had been destined when he picked up Hiwei's call over a month ago. "Senior, Wang Peng's out. I want to get back at him. Can you help me?" The unfamiliar number and voice didn't ring any bells for Chen Yichen. It wasn't until Hiwei identified herself that memories from the past rushed back to him like a tidal wave. Chen Yichen and Hiwei weren't very familiar, and he hadn't particularly liked her. She always seemed so meek and cowardly, with drooping brows, a fragile voice, and a posture that hid behind Anai Chong like a limp parasitic plant. But the more he thought about it, the more Hiwei seemed like a parasitic plant. While she appeared weak and harmless, once she latched onto someone, she drained their energy until they were spent. Regardless of whether it was voluntary or not, Hiwei's constant need for protection stirred Anai Chong's desire to shield her, leading Anai Chong to fight battles on her behalf. It was because of Hiwei that Anai Chong had her first confrontation with Wang Peng. Anai Chong had stood in front of Hiwei, warning Wang Peng that secretly recording and distributing private videos was punishable by law, urging him to stop harassing her. If Chen Yichen hadn't arrived in time, Wang Peng's slap would have landed squarely on Anai Chong's face. But despite this, Hiwei didn't show up after the incident, nor did she appear at the funeral. It wasn't until over a month ago that Hiwei suddenly appeared, asking him to help get revenge on Wang Peng. Though Chen Yichen didn't trust her, he joined the vengeful cause and helped beat Wang Peng in a dark alley. For a moment, it felt like returning to the reckless love and hate of their past. He threw himself into every punch, letting it release years of anger, as if avenging a lost lover and punishing his past mistakes all at once. But Hiwei's actions were even harsher than his. There seemed to be a split inside her. Half of her was weak and scared, hesitant even to threaten others. The other half was consumed by rage, willing to destroy herself just to make the other party pay in blood. But when he thought about it, it wasn't so strange after all. This was the seed Wang Peng had planted in her, and the final fruit. Even if it destroyed him, who could blame her? When Hiwei faced Chen Yichen, she always felt guilty. If it weren't for her, Anai Chong wouldn't have been targeted by Wang Peng. She remembered the day 3 years ago when Wang Peng had called her out. "If you just get that bitch to meet me, I'll delete the video. We can forget about everything." Wang Peng exhaled a thick cloud of cigarette smoke, which stank of rancid breath, and assaulted Hiwei's face. It was sickening. Before she could even wrinkle her brow, a slap landed hard on her face. "I'm talking to you, not mute." The sharp sound of the slap made passers-by turn their heads, but Wang Peng didn't care. "If you don't bring her, we'll meet online. Let's see how your classmates and teachers enjoy watching your slutty behavior." When Hiwei still didn't respond, Wang Peng lazily slapped her buttocks, then turned and walked away. Hiwei remained silent the entire time, like a clam, unyielding to the slap or the crude hand. Sometimes, Hiwei wondered why she allowed herself to be so humiliated. She knew she should resist, should call the police. Even if things got ugly, she couldn't keep letting this man get away with it. But whenever she saw his figure, heard his voice, or even received a message from him, her body would become numb, as if she were a marionette, her limbs moving against her will. Only her soul screamed, desperately trying to wake her body up. She went to Anai Chong with a bruised face. "We shouldn't see each other anymore." Hiwei tried to stay calm as she told Anai Chong she wanted to end their friendship. "I'm tired of you always acting like my protector, telling me what to do." Hiwei knew that because of Anai Chong standing up for her, Wang Peng had developed a deep resentment toward her. But as long as she severed ties with Anai Chong, Wang Peng wouldn't be able to threaten Anai Chong anymore. If separation was the best form of protection, Hiwei was willing to sever their bond with her own hands. "Stop your good intentions. You think you're so important? You're like a child who's been protected too well, playing house with others. I'm tired. I don't want to play anymore." Hiwei recited the harsh words she had prepared in advance, not daring to look at Anai Chong's face. "Let it end here. Don't interfere with me anymore." She told herself not to look back. She had already received so much warmth from Anai Chong, enough to endure the suffering that lay ahead. Now it was her turn to protect Anai Chong. In the second semester after their breakup, Hiwei chose a remote farm as her internship base for animal husbandry and veterinary medicine to escape both Anai Chong and the rumors about the private videos Wang Peng might release. The farm had no signal, just the smell of damp grass and swarming flies. Hiwei isolated herself in this far-off place, thinking that for once, She had been brave enough to protect her cherished friend. It wasn't until she returned to school that she learned she had not only failed to protect her best friend, but had even missed her funeral. "I'm sorry. I killed Anai Chong." Hiwei finally looked up, tears in her eyes. Due to their inability to locate Hiwei, the police expanded their investigation and began focusing on people connected to her. In doing so, a familiar name unexpectedly surfaced: Chunyi Chen. It was discovered that, shortly after Wang Peng's release from prison, Hiwei had called Chunyi Chen several times. Later, the phone number linked to the social media account used to accept the cleaning service orders was also found to have been in contact with Chunyi Chen around the time of account creation. Additionally, a landline number used during Zhao Xuemei's captivity had made calls to Chunyi Chen, and this landline was eventually traced back to a public phone at a convenience store near the suburban courtyard. At nearly every key point in Hiwei's actions, Chunyi Chen had received calls from her, with call durations ranging from 1 minute to an hour. While these phone records couldn't directly prove Chunyi Chen's involvement, they did suggest that his relationship with Hiwei was closer than he had previously admitted. The most direct evidence came from the suburban courtyard. Upon further investigation, the police discovered that the property where Zhao Xuemei had been held belonged to a retired couple. The couple had moved to the south 3 years ago to live out their retirement, leaving the small, unremarkable courtyard in the hands of a distant relative living in the city. That relative turned out to be none other than Chunyi Chen. Just as Chunyi Chen had claimed, he was out of town during the time of the crime, but with phone calls, he could easily help Hiwei strategize and even take part in the killings. According to those close to Hiwei, she was inherently weak and timid, and for her to commit 2 murders on her own was highly unlikely. If Chunyi Chen had been assisting her, it would certainly have made things much easier. Chunyi Chen also had a motive. The police contacted him again, but this time, he too had disappeared. They learned that, after finishing work that day, Chunyi Chen had not driven his usual car home, but had instead taken a taxi. Witnesses said the taxi wasn't an ordinary ride-hailing vehicle, but a traditional taxi that could be flagged down on the street. Considering that his usual vehicle was equipped with a dash cam and GPS, and the fact that he had deliberately avoided using a ride-hailing service, it was hard not to suspect that he had intended to avoid being tracked. Chunyi Chen was clearly cautious. Not only did he avoid using a personal car or ride-hailing services, but he also chose a pickup location on a secluded road without any cameras. If it hadn't been for a colleague passing by, the police wouldn't have even known he had taken the taxi. Where could he be hiding? The most likely answer was that he had gone to meet Hiwei. But the city was vast, and finding one person was no easy task. The investigation once again hit a dead end. However, no one expected that the day after Chunyi Chen's disappearance, he would return to work as usual, clocking in and out, and going home as if nothing had happened. On the 3rd day, Hiwei voluntarily turned herself in. She confessed to all of her crimes, detailing every step of her actions and stating that she was ready to accept legal punishment. Yet, throughout her confession, she never once mentioned Chunyi Chen's name. Even when the police presented the phone records linking her to Chunyi Chen, she insisted that it was only her unrequited love that had driven her to repeatedly pursue him. She claimed that he had never been involved in the murders and was completely unaware of her actions. Then how do you explain that the suburban courtyard where you imprisoned Zhao Xuemei belongs to a relative of Chunyi Chen? I've admired Chunyi Chen for a long time. I've secretly followed him a few times and knew he sometimes went to that courtyard. I took advantage of the time when he wasn't there and made it my own. Hiwei's stories seemed rehearsed, and her answers to the police's questions flowed without hesitation. But the more composed she appeared, the more unnatural it felt. You don't seem like the kind of person who would be capable of something like this. Just you alone, could you really kill a grown man and simultaneously abduct an elderly woman? For the first time, Hiwei hesitated. She took a deep breath and then slowed her speech, as though lost in a memory she didn't want to revisit. Yeah, I'm weak, useless, and I deserve to be bullied. But Wang Peng, he was wrong. He was wrong to lay his filthy hands on Anai Chong. When Wang Peng came towards me, I was terrified. Hiwei's voice was quiet, as if telling someone else's story. I always feel like the fear of being violated for the first time keeps coming back. It feels like being crushed by a rock, like being covered by a black cloth. I can't see. I can't hear. My mind goes blank and my body's heavy, unable to move. That's why I kept letting Wang Peng torment me, use me. It sounds like an excuse, but I really had no choice. I always thought he would be the nightmare I couldn't escape from. If it weren't for him and that woman forcing Anai Chang to her death, maybe I would have been controlled by him for the rest of my life. But there are no maybes. They killed the only person who ever truly cared for me. Hiwei's tone seemed to carry a hint of tears, but her eyes were dry. For the 3 years after Anai Chang's death, I couldn't stop thinking about killing Wang Peng. To get closer to more drugs, I became a veterinarian. I imagined 1,000 ways in my mind: how to seduce him, how to make him lower his head, how to thrust a sharp object into his neck. Thankfully, the opportunity finally came. Though my brain was terrified, my body moved on its own. Just like I imagined 1,000 times, I drove the needle straight into his artery. I finally defeated him, and I defeated myself. But it was too late. If I had been even half as brave back then, maybe Wang Peng wouldn't have targeted Anai Chang, and Anai Chang wouldn't have died. None of this would have happened. But there are no maybes. She finished her statement, and the last words lingered in the narrow interrogation room, soft and sorrowful. Look what I brought you. Chen Yichen pulled a small potted plant from behind his back, presenting it to the elderly woman like a treasure. The pale blue ceramic pot made the tiny succulent rose, barely the size of a palm, appear even more lush and vibrant, as though sculpted by nature itself, a delicate bouquet of jade, fresh and tender. Anai Chang's mother was in good spirits today. She happily took the plant from Chen Yichen. The plant Anai Chang took care of has sprouted new buds. I moved a few out and this one grew the best, so I brought it to you. The succulent in the courtyard had been one of the few things left by Anai Chang. Chen Yichen treated it as a continuation of her, tending to it carefully, though it took a long time before it finally began to sprout new buds. Where has Anai Chang been recently? Why hasn't she come to see me? Anai Chang's mother murmured as she cradled the plant, her voice reminiscent of a child's complaint. She went on a trip with some friends. She'll be back soon. I'll make sure to bring her to see you when she's back. Chen Yichen had long grown accustomed to Anai Chang's mother's confusion. He replied as he had many times before, while methodically sorting through the snacks and supplies he'd brought, arranging them just as she liked, appearing to do it with practiced ease. After Anai Chang passed away, Chen Yichen took on the responsibility of taking care of her parents, especially after her father's death. He covered all of Anai Chang's mother's expenses at the nursing home and would visit her regularly to chat. Halfway through putting everything away, a heavy sound interrupted him. He turned to see that the elderly woman had accidentally knocked the potted plant to the floor. Unperturbed, she continued flipping through an old photo album. The photo album was her treasure, the greatest joy in her nursing home life. The album held pictures from their family's journey, from their wedding to the birth of their daughter, and the slow process of raising her to adulthood. The thick album had been flipped through countless times. Even Chen Yichen had nearly memorized its contents, yet the elderly woman never grew tired of it. Over the years, her memory had grown worse, and she often couldn't distinguish between fantasy and reality, living in a dreamlike state of constant confusion. In her fantasies, her daughter was not dead, had gotten married, and Chen Yichen was her devoted son-in-law, living a blissful married life with Anai Chang. The foundation of this beautiful dream world was the photographs in that album, each one capturing a moment of happiness. Sometimes, Chen Yichen envied the elderly woman's delusions. She forgot the pain, living in a fabricated world of happiness. Wasn't that a kind of happiness, too? It was the ones who remembered everything, who couldn't let go. The past pains and resentments were revisited every night, the bitterness and regret stacking on top of each other until they became an unspeakable wound, which, with the slightest touch, would break open and fester. Chen Yichen had once harbored resentment toward Huey. After all, if it hadn't been for her, Anai Chong would never have met Wang Peng, and everything that followed wouldn't have happened. Moreover, Huey had not appeared after Anai Chong's incident or even at her funeral. It wasn't until 3 years later that Huey reappeared and asked him to help get revenge on Wang Peng. That's when they cleared up the misunderstanding. Chen Yichen had once asked Anai Chong what she hoped to achieve with all her efforts. "I don't know," Anai Chong had answered honestly. "But I don't care. I just want to help her." At that time, Anai Chong was watering the plants. A beam of sunlight fell on her beautiful face, and she gazed tenderly at the plant that had just sprouted buds. Anai Chong was the type of person who treated even flowers and plants with the utmost care. Her innocence and compassion were her most precious qualities. Later, Chen Yichen realized Huey was also like that. "Even without Anai Chong, I hated Wang Peng's family, and if it weren't for her, I wouldn't have made it through those years. Maybe I would have died long ago. These are all things I owe to her." The woman, who had resolved to take on all the blame herself, spoke softly, her tone as calm as Anai Chong's. "Where has Anai Chong been lately? Why hasn't she come to see me?" Anai Chong's mother asked again, her voice tinged with a little grievance. "Anai Chong is out having fun all the time and doesn't even think to send me pictures." Chen Yichen snapped back to the present and saw the elderly woman still fiddling with the last photo of her daughter in the album, a look of loneliness in her eyes. Though Anai Chong's mother often confused things, there were moments when her mind would be clearer. While she had forgotten her daughter's death, she remembered the number of photos and wondered why the few photos of her beloved daughter never seemed to change, with no new pictures. Every time this happened, Chen Yichen had to thank the progress of technology, for it allowed him to create a nearly perfect new photo of Anai Chong to keep the elderly woman's beautiful dream alive. He took out his phone, which contained the new photo he had edited over 5 days. "Look, this is the photo Anai Chong sent me this morning. They took it in Xinjiang's Ili." Anai Chong's mother happily took the phone and squinted her eyes to examine it closely. Who is this girl? She looks a little familiar." The elderly woman pointed at the figure beside Anai Chong and asked. Chen Yichen's smile faltered for a moment. That figure was added by him out of his own desire. Now, when the elderly woman asked, a deep sense of melancholy washed over him. This was the only thing he could do for them. He just hoped that, in another, better parallel world, they could really be as happy as they appeared in that photo. In the photo, amidst a sprawling sea of flowers stretching to the horizon, 2 girls stood side by side. One was smiling brilliantly like the sun, while the other had a slight smile, her eyes filled with the same sunny, unclouded joy. She's Huey, Anai Chong's best friend for life.